It looked like just another moving job. A plain white removals van. 2 men in uniforms. A load of furniture heading for mainland Europe. No alarms, no weapons, no questions. But hidden deep inside the compartments, beneath wardrobes, toolboxes and flat-packed chairs, was something else. Not explosives, not guns. Just powder, white, compressed, pure. Over £130 million worth. This is the story of how a quiet man from Sutton Coldfield, no gang tattoos, no criminal record, built one of the biggest cocaine empires in modern UK history. Jonathan Arnold wasn't a cartel boss. He wasn't even on police radar. He ran a furniture removals company. But behind the curtain, he moved tons of cocaine across borders, hid millions in clean profits, and built a silent empire, until one mistake shattered it all. Jonathan Arnold lived in Sutton Coldfield, just outside Birmingham. He ran a small removals company, Real Estate Removals. The business wasn't flashy. The vans were plain white. The website was basic. No big branding. No social media noise. On the outside, it looked like hundreds of other British moving firms, helping families relocate, shipping house furniture, maybe the odd office contract. Clients called him professional, polite, punctual. He wore a branded hoodie. Posed for pictures beside packed-up trucks. Claimed £50,000 a month in earnings, just enough to look credible. But that was only half the story. Behind closed doors, Arnold was living a very different kind of life. He wore a Rolex worth more than most people's cars. He booked last-minute business-class flights to Dubai, and took trips in Ferraris through desert highways. He smiled in photos from private resorts, flashing perfect white veneers from a cosmetic dental makeover. This wasn't the lifestyle of a small-time mover. It was something else. Something much bigger. And yet, nothing about him stood out. No gang affiliations. No police record. Just a clean-cut man with a clipboard and a van, quietly moving tons of cocaine across borders. By the time investigators caught up with him, Jonathan Arnold had already trafficked an estimated £135 million worth of Class A drugs into the UK. Cocaine. Heroin. Ketamine. The vehicles were custom-built. The drugs were buried under real furniture, layered with coffee grounds to mask the scent. And the kicker? He'd learned the transport business not in the streets, but working under his father, in a legitimate UK signage company. He took that knowledge and built an empire no one saw coming. Jonathan Arnold didn't grow up in the shadows. He wasn't born into poverty. He didn't live in gang territory. He was raised in one of the UK's most stable environments, Sutton Coldfield, a leafy middle-class town on the edge of Birmingham. His childhood wasn't marked by struggle. In fact, he was cherished. His mother would later describe him as precious, a child they'd waited nearly a decade to have. She wasn't just any mother. She was Sue Arnold, a respected Conservative politician and the former Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Staffordshire. A woman who once led campaigns against domestic abuse, cybercrime and organized trafficking. His father, John Arnold, ran a successful UK signage business, a company Jonathan would later join as a young man, learning how logistics worked from the inside out. On paper, this was a family deeply embedded in law, order and structure. A mother who worked alongside police. A father who built a national company from scratch. And a son who showed no signs of rebellion. Jonathan was educated privately at Repton School, one of Britain's elite institutions, the kind of place that costs over £40,000 a year and boasts alumni like Roald Dahl and Jeremy Clarkson. At Repton, students are taught discipline, confidence and ambition, groomed for leadership, not crime. But ambition doesn't always lead where you expect. Somewhere between the polished corridors of Repton and the back of a removals van, something changed. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was greed. Or maybe it was the desire to build something, anything, that felt powerful and fully his. Whatever it was, the boy who grew up surrounded by law enforcement, order and privilege would go on to become the architect of one of the largest drug trafficking networks ever uncovered in the UK. And the first steps were taken without a single fingerprint out of place. By the way, if you have enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like and share this video as it will encourage us to create more videos on UK organized crime. It started with a van. A plain white van. No logos, no flashy colors. Just a clean vehicle with empty space and a lot of potential. Jonathan Arnold didn't need to reinvent the wheel. What he built wasn't a fantasy, it was a logistics operation disguised as a removal company and powered by experience. He already knew how the transport business worked. He had learned it under his father's signage firm, managing materials, coordinating drivers, building routes, and moving goods across the UK without raising any alarms. Now he simply changed the cargo. From signs to cocaine. The company, Real Estate Removals, was the perfect front. It looked legitimate. It had invoices, branding, and enough real jobs to seem active. On paper, it reported about £50,000 a month in earnings. Not enough to raise suspicion, but just enough to look like it was working. But behind the numbers, Arnold was overseeing one of the most sophisticated drug transport systems ever seen in modern UK crime. The method was simple. And that's what made it dangerous. Cocaine shipments would arrive into Europe, often from Colombia, through Rotterdam or Amsterdam. From there, Arnold's team picked up the load in removals vans and drove them through Belgium and France, into the UK through Dover or Calais. Inside each vehicle were compartments designed to be invisible to the naked eye. Hidden panels, false floors, modified cavities behind fake furniture. Some of the drugs were wrapped and concealed under actual house furniture. Sofa sets, wardrobes, even garden tools. Others were tucked inside banana boxes, coffee containers, or DIY crates. Every load was covered in coffee grounds, air fresheners, and scented dryer sheets, anything to confuse sniffer dogs and suppress the scent of chemicals. But the real genius wasn't in the smell. It was in the silence. No calls, no texts. Everything was handled face-to-face, or through carefully managed handoffs. Drivers were trained to say very little. If stopped, they had invoices, delivery sheets, and manifest logs showing they were transporting home furniture for real clients. The vans themselves were registered under real removals jobs, giving every trip a paper trail. Even the routes were selected with precision, avoiding high-scrutiny ports or choosing off-peak travel times. At its peak, more than 1.5 tons of Class A drugs moved across borders under Arnold's direction, nearly £135 million worth by police estimates. But what made Arnold's system work wasn't just his planning. It was his ability to stay invisible. He never touched the drugs himself. He rarely traveled, but did travel to Dubai, and investigators found that he booked last-minute business class tickets, stayed at luxury resorts, drove Ferraris and wore a Rolex, had cosmetic dental work, veneers. However, these luxuries were kept offline and out of the public eye. He didn't flash wealth online or taunt police. He stayed in the background, moving his empire from the shadows, just a man, a van, and a network that nobody suspected, until the first bag was opened. Jonathan Arnold may have been the architect. But empires don't run alone. Behind every sealed van, behind every trip across Europe, was a crew of men who knew exactly what was happening, and played their part without hesitation. These weren't gangsters with ski masks and shotguns. They were men with no criminal records, no gang tattoos, and no reason to raise suspicion. They looked like truck drivers, builders, neighbors, and that's what made them dangerous. Dean Riley was the one who got things moving. A key courier in the operation, he made cross-border trips himself, driving from the UK into Europe and back with hundreds of kilos of cocaine hidden in secret compartments. He was calm, disciplined, and consistent, a man the police would later describe as crucial to the entire logistics chain. Riley didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He followed the plan, moved the goods, and made it home every time, until the final trip caught up with him. James Jenkins was another vital piece. Described in court as someone with logistical understanding, Jenkins handled some of the more delicate operations, loading, hiding, coordinating handoffs. He was the type to blend in, not flashy, not reckless, but always on time. His job: to ensure that what went into the van came out clean, untouched, and untraceable. And then there was Jamie Betteridge. His role overlapped with both Riley and Jenkins. He helped drive but also helped plan. Investigators believe Betteridge may have been the one ensuring drivers kept quiet and that no one slipped up under pressure. He was present during at least 2 major cross-border trips, including one where over 60 kilograms of cocaine were recovered by UK border force. Like the others, Betteridge was invisible to the outside world. But to Arnold, he was one of the few people who knew just how big the operation really was. Each man had a role. Arnold gave the direction. Riley moved the product. Jenkins handled the logistics. Betteridge kept the wheels from falling off. Together they formed a tight unit, not bonded by blood but by trust and silence. And just like Arnold, none of them ever touched the drugs with their bare hands. Every shipment was sealed. Every handoff calculated. Every van disguised. The system worked because the people inside it knew how to disappear in plain sight. What bound them together wasn't greed alone. It was the idea that if they followed the system, if no one broke rank, the money would keep flowing and the law would stay blind. But empires built on silence don't fall apart all at once. They unravel one whisper at a time. And soon one of these men would make a mistake. For months the operation ran like clockwork. Vans rolled across borders. Customs forms were clean. The drugs stayed hidden and the men stayed silent. No raids, no arrests, no red flags. But criminal systems rarely collapse from the outside. They fall from within. And in Arnold's case, it started with a dog. It was June 2022, and a real estate removals lorry had just rolled off a ferry into Kent. Nothing unusual. The paperwork was in order. The driver kept his answers short, casual, professional. But something in the air caught a border force dog's attention. The animal circled the van. Paused. Sniffed again. Then sat down. That's all it took. Officers pulled the vehicle aside and began the search. Inside they found 60 kilograms of compressed cocaine, worth several million pounds, hidden inside carefully constructed trap compartments. It was the first time UK authorities had caught the operation red-handed. When police traced the van's registration, it didn't lead to a faceless gang. It led straight back to Jonathan Arnold's company. Suddenly, what had looked like a regular removals firm became the prime suspect in an international drug trafficking probe. But the authorities didn't act immediately. They waited, watched. They started mapping van movements, cross-referencing port entries, monitoring drivers and quietly collecting evidence. The walls were closing in. And Arnold didn't even know it yet. From that moment, Arnold's invisible system became the subject of a multi-agency task force. The West Midlands Roku Border Force and National Crime Agency launched a full-scale investigation. They installed tracking devices, collected CCTV footage, pulled customs records. And every time a van crossed the channel, the noose tightened. The genius of Arnold's empire was that it didn't look criminal. No gang turf, no street violence, no dirty money flaunted online. It was quiet, clean, professional. That illusion had protected them, until now. And now, it was breaking apart one interception at a time. Over the following weeks, investigators uncovered more vans, more drugs, more links to Arnold's drivers. The hidden compartments were similar. The routes repeated. The paperwork echoed. A pattern had formed. And a case was building. Back at the company's base in Sutton Coldfield, Arnold carried on like nothing had changed. He had no idea that his drivers were being tracked. That his company records were being copied. That investigators were drawing a line, van by van, route by route, straight back to him. But every system has a breaking point. And the break was coming. By late 2022, the illusion was almost gone. The removals vans had been seized. The compartments had been exposed. Multiple drivers had been quietly pulled aside at ports, questioned and booked. But the man behind it all, Jonathan Arnold, was still moving freely. Still coordinating. Still denying. Still pretending nothing was wrong. But that was about to change. On a cold morning in early 2023, law enforcement made their move. The West Midlands Regional Organised Crime Unit, backed by the National Crime Agency, carried out a series of raids across the UK. They struck fast. In Sutton Coldfield, Arnold's base of operations was raided. Officers stormed storage units, seized hard drives, recovered encrypted phones and photographed hidden compartments in the vans parked nearby. At the same time, his core associates were also targeted. Dean Riley, James Jenkins, Jamie Betteridge. Each man was arrested at different locations. Each charged with conspiracy to import and supply Class A drugs. The empire had officially collapsed. The evidence was overwhelming. Phones containing encrypted messages about routes, weights and drop points. Photos of modified vehicle interiors. Invoices that didn't match actual trips. A digital paper trail leading from one shipment to the next. Investigators built a timeline, matching every seizure to the movement of real estate removals vans. They traced logistics all the way from Rotterdam and Amsterdam, through Calais into Kent, and finally to addresses in Birmingham and beyond. It wasn't speculation. It was logistics forensics, and it painted Jonathan Arnold as the mastermind. At Birmingham Crown Court, Jonathan Arnold stood before a judge and listened as the full scope of his actions was read aloud. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import Class A drugs, conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, money laundering. The court heard that Arnold had coordinated the trafficking of over 1.5 tons of Class A drugs, worth more than £135 million in estimated street value, over a span of 18 months. He was described as a man who had abused trust, laundered millions, and used his legitimate business to conceal serious and sustained criminality. He was sentenced to 23 years and 6 months in prison. His co-conspirators were sentenced alongside him. Dean Riley, 24 years and 6 months. James Jenkins, 19 years and 6 months. Jamie Betteridge, 18 years and 6 months. Collectively, the group received over 85 years behind bars. The court called it one of the most well-organized trafficking operations ever uncovered in the UK, hidden in plain sight and driven by silence. But one detail made headlines above all. Jonathan Arnold's mother, Sue Arnold, had spent years fighting crime, serving as the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Staffordshire. She had once funded anti-drug campaigns, backed youth diversion programs, spoke publicly about keeping kids off the street. And now, her son had become one of the most successful drug traffickers in the country's recent history. In public statements, she called his sentence excessive and claimed he was not the kingpin. But the court saw something else. They saw a man who knew the system well enough to exploit it, and they sent him away accordingly. With the courtroom sentences handed down, the case of Jonathan Arnold officially ended. But not everything was finished. Because what he exposed wasn't just a drug empire. It was a system of silence, one that made it all possible. A system where you can drive across 3 countries with tons of cocaine, and no one ever stops to ask what's inside the van. A system where money is moved without trace, businesses are never audited, and vans are never scanned for cash or narcotics unless something goes terribly wrong. And the question is, how many more are still out there? The truth is, Jonathan Arnold didn't invent a new kind of crime. He simply understood how to exploit the old, ignored vulnerabilities in systems that were never built to catch people like him. Systems that check for explosives, not banknotes. That flag terrorists, not transporters. That assumed the man in a branded hoodie driving a furniture van must be honest. He wasn't. And he wasn't alone. Investigators now believe Arnold's empire is part of a wider, hidden economy, where removal trucks, shipping containers, and front companies are the new battleground for global trafficking. Behind the statistics, the street value, and the jail time, there are lives that never made the headlines. Addicts who never knew where their next fix came from. Families ripped apart by substances that crossed into the UK in silence. Communities where violence erupted, fueled by the very drugs hidden in Arnold's vans. This wasn't victimless. It was calculated. And it was devastating. So what do we learn from all this? That a removals man could become a kingpin? That an empire can be built in plain sight? Or that the systems meant to protect us aren't failing, they're just outdated? Maybe the real lesson is this. If one man could do this with vans, coffee grounds, and silence, what else is happening right now, undetected, unchecked, and right under our noses? What do you make of this case? Did the justice system go far enough? Should UK customs rethink how they scan for money and contraband? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, deep dives that go beyond headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this was just one case, and there are always more.